You could walk in wearing a suit or wearing overalls. Nobody cared. The waitress would be at your side in 30 seconds, coffee pot already in hand, and she wouldn't ask if you wanted some. She already knew. That red vinyl stool squeaked a little when you sat down. The jukebox was playing something by Elvis, or maybe the Platters. Bacon was sizzling somewhere behind that long counter, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with everything else in a way that told your brain one simple thing: you're home. This was the American diner in the 1950s. And what we lost when most of them disappeared wasn't just a place to eat. It was something much harder to replace. Let's talk about what you actually saw when you walked through that glass door, because every detail in a 1950s diner was designed to make you feel welcome, whether the owners realized it or not. The long counter ran the entire length of the place, usually with 10 to 20 chrome-based swivel stools bolted to the floor. Red vinyl seats. You could spin on them as a kid, and plenty of adults did too when nobody was looking. That counter wasn't just functional, it was the great equalizer. A truck driver could sit right next to a bank manager, a factory worker next to a shop owner. No reservations, no assigned seating. You sat where there was room, and that meant sitting next to strangers. The booths along the walls were upholstered in that same cherry red vinyl, diamond tufted or channel pleated, depending on the place. Red wasn't chosen randomly. It popped against all that chrome and stainless steel. It held its color well under heavy use, and it was easy to wipe clean. So practical and beautiful at the same time. Formica countertops in those space-age boomerang and cracked ice patterns, chrome napkin dispensers, chrome salt shakers, chrome trim on everything. Mirrors behind the counter made the narrow space feel twice as big while reflecting all that glittering metal back at you. And then there was the open kitchen. This was actually revolutionary for its time. No hidden back room where mysterious things happened to your food. You watched the cook crack your eggs. You watched him flip your burger. You saw exactly what was going on, and that transparency built trust in a way that closed kitchens never could. The short order cook was part chef, part performer. He'd call out orders in diner slang that sounded like a foreign language. Adam and Eve on a raft meant poached eggs on toast, while burn one all the way was a chocolate malted. Watching a skilled short order cook work a busy griddle was like watching a musician. Everything timed perfectly, spatulas moving with practiced precision, plates coming up hot and complete. And at every booth, those little Seeburg or Wurlitzer wallbox jukeboxes with their chrome casings and illuminated song cards. Drop in a dime, punch your selection, and suddenly your booth had its own soundtrack. Rock and roll was new and dangerous and thrilling, and the diner was where teenagers got to experience it away from their parents' ears. The 1950s didn't invent the diner, but the 1950s perfected it. By 1951, there were around 6,000 diners across America, concentrated heavily in the Northeast. New Jersey alone had so many that it earned the nickname Diner Capital of the World. The conditions were perfect. World War II had just ended. Young men came home with savings and ambition, looking for business opportunities. A prefabricated diner could be ordered from manufacturers like Jerry O'Mahony or Coleman Industries, delivered by truck, and opened for business within weeks. It was an affordable path to the American dream. Meanwhile, Americans suddenly had money to spend after years of wartime rationing. Car ownership was exploding. Families were hitting the new highways, and they needed places to stop and eat. Diners positioned themselves at busy intersections, along routes like Route 66, near factory gates where shift workers needed meals at all hours. The design reached its peak during this decade, that distinctive streamlined look borrowed from the Burlington Zephyr train, with aerodynamic curves and bullet-shaped ends. Stainless steel exteriors caught sunlight by day and reflected neon by night. These weren't just restaurants anymore. They were roadside monuments to American optimism. The food was simple. That was the point. A 1950s diner burger wasn't the thick steakhouse patty you see today. It was thin, pressed hard on the flat-top griddle until the edges got crispy. What we now call a smash burger, they just called a hamburger. Ground chuck, American cheese, pickles, onions, ketchup. Nothing fancy, everything delicious. The blue plate special was the signature deal. One divided plate with a main course, usually meatloaf or Salisbury steak or roast turkey, plus 3 or 4 vegetables, bread, and often a drink. The name came from the inexpensive blue-patterned dishes restaurants used. Everything you needed for a complete meal, priced so a working person could afford to eat out. Breakfast was served all day. This matters more than it sounds. If you worked the night shift at a factory and got off at 6 in the morning, you could get eggs and bacon when your body wanted eggs and bacon. The diner didn't operate on the same schedule as fancy restaurants. It operated on your schedule. The pie case near the register rotated slowly, showing off mile-high meringue. Lemon meringue, coconut cream, banana cream, apple, cherry. A slice cost almost nothing, and adding ice cream cost even less. Milkshakes came in those tall glasses with the metal mixing cup that still had extra in it, and the server left both at your table. That little gesture, leaving you the extra, was a form of generosity that chain restaurants would never replicate. And coffee. Always coffee. Bottomless, meaning the refills kept coming without you asking. The waitress watched the tables. It'd be reading when your cup was getting low, and she'd appear with the pot before you even looked up. That endless cup of coffee sent a message. There's no rush here. You're welcome to stay. Here's where we get to what we really miss. Because it wasn't the chrome or the pie or even the coffee, it was the people. Career waitresses defined diner culture. These weren't teenagers working summer jobs. These were women who spent decades at the same counter, watching families grow, watching regulars get older, becoming part of the community in ways that went far beyond taking orders. One waitress named Robin McAllister worked at a Pennsylvania diner for 28 years, more than half her adult life serving the same customers, pouring the same coffee. When that diner finally closed, she wore a homemade button that said, "Robin loves 28 years." She and the other longtime staff embraced regulars through tears. That's not a job. That's family. These women knew your name. They knew your order. They knew your story. The good diner waitress would start making your food the moment she saw your car pull into the lot because she already knew what you wanted. If you didn't show up for a few days, she might actually call your house to make sure you were okay. This happened. This was normal. Regulars became as much a part of the diner as the fixtures. One man ate at the same diner from its opening day in 1966 until it closed nearly 50 years later. He estimated around 15,000 meals at that one counter. When they closed for good, he was there for the final breakfast. The owners were ever present too. This wasn't corporate management sending directives from headquarters. The owner's wife might arrive at 3:30 in the morning to start baking pot pies. The owner himself might greet every customer personally, wearing a suit because he took pride in his establishment. You knew whose place this was. They knew who you were. Sociologists have a term for places like the 1950s diner. They call them third places. Not home, not work, but somewhere essential in between. A space where community actually happens. The thing about third places is that they level social hierarchies. In a diner, your rank didn't matter. Your status didn't matter. Your education didn't matter. You walked in, you sat down, you were served the same food as everyone else. The counter especially forced this democracy. You couldn't avoid sitting next to strangers when every stool was full. And in that forced proximity, conversations happened. Connections formed. Neighbors who might never have spoken otherwise discovered common ground over meatloaf. For teenagers in the 1950s, the diner was freedom. It was a supervised space where young people could gather without their parents present, negotiate the complicated social dynamics of adolescence, go on affordable dates, and experience that new rock and roll music blasting from the jukebox. The diner was where teenage culture happened. For night shift workers, nurses finishing hospital rounds, factory workers after the graveyard shift, truckers on long hauls, the 24-hour diner was a lifeline. A warm, lit place in the darkness where you could get a hot meal and some human contact when the rest of the world was asleep. For the Sunday after church crowd in small towns across America, the local diner might be the only restaurant. The place where the community gathered weekly, where friendships deepened over decades, where people marked time by the milestones shared across those red vinyl booths. The decline started in the late 1950s and accelerated through the following decades. McDonald's and Burger King offered something diners couldn't match, speed, and predictability. Every burger at every location tasted exactly the same. No surprises, no relationship required. The interstate highway system bypassed the old routes where diners had thrived for generations. Small towns along Route 66 watched traffic vanish almost overnight as travelers took the faster roads that no longer passed through their main streets. The diners that depended on that traffic couldn't follow. Rising real estate costs made the small footprint of a traditional diner increasingly impractical. The land that supported a 30-seat diner could generate more profit as a chain restaurant or a strip mall. Many diner owners, getting older and unable to compete with national advertising budgets, simply closed their doors. From those 6,000 diners at the peak, roughly 2,000 remain today. Fewer than 20 of the original Jerry O'Mahony diners still exist. What took decades to build disappeared in a generation. When people say they miss 1950s diners, they're almost never talking about the hamburgers. The hamburgers were good, but you can get a good hamburger. What you can't easily get anymore is what the diner provided beyond the food. Face-to-face conversation without screens. Predictable routine at the same place with the same people. Local ownership instead of corporate chains. That forced social mixing at the counter with people you might not choose to sit next to. And, most importantly, being known. Having someone remember your name and your troubles and your usual order. Having someone who noticed when you didn't show up. The diner was proof that strangers could become neighbors. That routine could become ritual. That a cheap meal could come with something money can't easily buy. The feeling of belonging somewhere. There's a famous painting from 1942 by Edward Hopper called Nighthawks. You've probably seen it even if you don't know the name. 4 figures in a brightly lit diner, visible through the plate glass windows against surrounding darkness. Art critics have debated for decades whether it depicts loneliness or refuge. Maybe it's both. The diner as a beacon of light against the night, a moment of finding warmth when everything outside seems cold. That's what we miss. Not the chrome, though the chrome was beautiful. Not the pie, though the pie was delicious. Not even the prices, though they were remarkably fair. We miss the radical idea that a space could exist where you were welcome exactly as you arrived. No reservations necessary, no dress code, no pretense. Just a squeaky red stool, a waitress who already knew your name, mian and coffee that never stopped flowing. The diners are mostly gone now. But what we hunger for, what they fed that went beyond food, that hunger remains. Connection, belonging, community. The simple human need to walk through a door and know that someone inside is glad to see you. That's what we miss about diners in the 1950s.